So, this all happened to me about 10 years ago in 2004. I had decided to go solo camping. Nothing too crazy, just wanted to get away from life for a few days and enjoy the wilderness. All I brought was a tent, some matches, a fishing rod, my rifle, and couple other miscellaneous things for preparing and storing food. The campsite itself was pretty secluded. And for the safety of any who reads this, I won't be sharing that location. I got to the campground around noon on a Friday. It was pretty nice. Had a small creek just downhill of me, a nice flat area surrounded by pine trees that went on for miles. There was a small foot trail leading to it about 3 miles long. Only a 45-minute walk from where I parked. It was somewhat up a mountain. Not very high, but I was well above sea level. First thing I did was set up my one-man tent. I didn't have a sleeping bag or anything and I completely intended on sleeping on the ground. I had done it before, and luckily for me there wasn't much gravel or rocks under me. Just the soft earth. I went out and got some dead wood for a fire. Got some rocks to make a fire ring and set up for a fire that I'd light after it got dark. It was pretty warm so there was no need for it during the day. I wasn't too hungry that day so I didn't go and try to catch some fish or anything. I just chilled around my campsite till sunset. Sunset. That's when it started. After the sun had evaded the sky, the temperature dropped drastically. I don't know how cold it got, but I'd say it was in the 30s. I got my matches out and lit the fire. I had even dragged over a log to sit on by the fire. About an hour after sunset, a thick heavy fog rolled in. So thick I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And an awful stench. I couldn't tell what it was. Maybe a dead animal. Whatever it was, at least it wasn't too strong. I decided it was time to go to bed around then. The orange glow of the fire barely visible through the fog. I thought it wasn't too windy and the area had got a lot of rain recently, so I was gonna let it burn itself out. I climbed into my tent and left it unzipped so the heat from the fire could blow in. I laid there for about 30 minutes before I started to doze off. I woke up to an awful screech. It sounded like a woman crying for help. I jumped up and grabbed my rifle from beside the tent. I have no idea what time it was, but the moon was almost directly above me, so I'd guess around midnight. The fog had mostly rolled out, and the fire was still smoldering slightly. I stood there, waiting and listening for another scream. And then it came. The second screech. This time much closer, and it no longer sounded like a woman in distress. It was just awful. I can't describe it. Every hair on my body stood up. My skin covered in goosebumps. I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I just stood in fear. I stood there for about 10 minutes till my nerves had calmed down. I climbed back into my tent with my rifle and laid there watching the tree line, waiting for anything to come out, but nothing ever did. I woke up the next morning around sunrise. I got up and climbed out of my tent, and that's when I saw it. Animal tracks. I assumed it's from whatever I had heard last night. But these weren't regular tracks. Each track had 7. I don't fucking know. Finger imprints? They weren't paw prints at all. They looked like human hands with long, gnarly fingers. This is one of the dumbest things I've ever done, but I just ignored it. Figured whatever it was had left. I collected some more wood and put it by my fire ring before grabbing my pole and walking downhill to the creek. I probably spent 5 or 6 hours fishing. Mostly because nothing was biting. I went back up to my campsite with 3 fish. It wasn't a lot, but it'd feed me today and tomorrow. I spent some time cleaning the fish, putting 2 in my tent wrapped in some plastic wrap. Then I spent some more time just hanging out in the wilderness. I walked the area a bit, getting a bearing of my surroundings. The sun started to get low when I got back to my tent. So I got my matches, arranged some wood in a teepee and started a fire to cook my fish. I grabbed a stick, popped the fish I had out on the end of it, and began cooking it. The sun had almost set when I pulled it out of the fire and began eating. After my belly was full, the sun was down, and it was pretty dark out. I tossed some more wood on the fire and stoked it. I couldn't bring myself to get to bed as quickly after the night before, but I found myself pretty tired after a couple hours. So, I climbed in my tent with my rifle and laid down. Just as I started to doze off, the screech came again. This time, I was sure it was in my campsite. I grabbed my rifle and jumped out of my tent. What happened next is the most terrifying thing that has ever happened in my life. There it was. Standing right there. On all fours. Its legs? Arms? Whatever they were, they long, disproportionate, very mutilated and scarred. Bones bulged out through the skin on its back legs. It had a very thin layer of gray hair all over its body. Its skin was pale and bloody. And its face. Oh God, its face. Its eyes were bloody and red. The white of its eyes black as night. Its nose nothing more than a hole in the center of its face, blood running from it. Its mouth was wide. It dangled open like it had no jawbone, literally stretching from ear to ear. Sharp, jagged teeth lined the lower jaw. On its upper jaw were flat, rounded teeth. Hundreds of them. It didn't have lips. Just rows of teeth. Its back was hunched. Its spine covered in spikes from its neck to its rear. Its breathing was loud and heavy. It was as if someone was right in my ear breathing as loudly as possible. And the stench. It smelled of rotting corpses. It looked like a rotting corpse. I almost gagged at its scent. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there. It just stood there. I went to bring my rifle up when it let out another screech. It hurt. It hurt so bad. Blood began pouring out of my ears. My eardrums had burst, I was sure of it. I dropped my rifle and grabbed my head in pain. It quickly ran up to me and in a single swipe, sent me flying into the tree line. From there, it quickly ran at me, its jaw snapped shut on my arm and it began dragging me into the forest. At some point along the way, I grabbed a rock and bashed it against its skull. It dropped me, which gave me enough time to run. I somehow managed to get back to my campsite where I grabbed my rifle and sprinted down the trail. What was a 45-minute walk on the way in, was a 15-minute run on the way out. I don't know how I did it. Adrenaline? I don't know, but I made it back to my pickup. I got in and drove out of there like a bat out of hell. I am lucky to have survived. With minor injuries. I had a few cracked ribs and a pretty gnarly bite wound on my arm. But I was alive. I don't know why now, after 10 years I've decided to share this. But here I am. My close friends and family have heard about this. A few even believe me. But I will never be camping alone again. It still haunts my nightmares.